And with that, I'm going to ask Katie to go ahead and introduce herself and go ahead with her presentation. And
Uh,
thank you very much, Katie.
well, thank you. Well, good evening to all of you, and thank you very much for having me. Um, I am a retired teacher from Cincinnati Public Schools. I taught for 27 years and have always been active in the community, working on school levies and school board races. So, being an activist in favor of public education has been my entire life. So, let me start with telling you what the state school board was supposed to do. State school board and any school board is supposed to work with the members of school boards, the superintendent, the community, the parents, and all the stakeholders to create a strategic plan. These are the priorities for your school district. You use your data, you use your budget, and you make sure that you are addressing the needs of your students in your district. And every meeting you have, you need to look at that strategic plan, look at your data, look at your budget to see if you are doing what you say that you meant to do. And this is also very much in the public eye. They can see what you're doing. And then that school board has the ability to hold that school district accountable if they are not meeting the targets that they have assigned to them. That is what school boards are supposed to do. Back in 1953, the citizens of Ohio led a citizen-led constitutional amendment to make sure that the Department of Education, as well as the State Board of Education, was a nonpartisan department. People were very concerned at that time because someone would get elected to office and then they would give somebody, say, oh, here, hire all these people as teachers. These people need jobs. So parents were finding out that they were having unqualified people teaching their children, and they didn't want that. So that referendum passed. And in our 1953 Constitution, it said that the State Board of Education must be nonpartisan and the Board of Education nonpartisan. Well, that went pretty well with 11 elected state board members until 1992, when President Bush and Voinovich decided that they needed to start taking control back from the Board of Education and the Department of Education. So they convinced our state legislature to add to the state school board 8 appointed members by the governor and approved by the Senate. Since that time, things have not been easy going forward. Also, at that time is when vouchers started in the state of Ohio. So you see how long this has been building. All the plans that they've put in place started back 1992. So let me tell you about my journey. I was part of the state strategic plan, developing the strategic plan that was developed in Ohio. It is a tremendous strategic plan, and it's based on the 5 tenets of the whole child framework. Those tenets are these. In order for children to be successful in school, number 1, they got to be healthy. They got to have food in their belly. They've got to be able to see. They've got to be able to hear. And they have to have the opportunity to get the health care that they need. Bringing a child into a classroom that doesn't feel well, they're not going to learn. The second tenet is that children and their families, we have found, need supports. Many of our children are dealing with adverse childhood experiences, some really serious problems. They're living in poverty, and they need to have supports. Many of our children need mental health services or disability services before they come to school. The third tenet is that when children come to school, they need to know that they are welcomed, that they are respected, and that they belong in their classroom. This is an integral part of the teacher evaluation system, that Teachers need to make sure that they know their children and they welcome and are working with each one of their children in a respectful manner. When those three things take place, then we can start challenging children with academics. But what we have found is that the academics need to be relevant to a child's life. I can remember when I was in high school, I got to read books written by dead white guys from England. That didn't talk much about me, and that certainly wouldn't work for many of our populations of children. But for them to read a book that has somebody in them that looks like them, maybe comes from their heritage, comes from their culture, those are the things that are important. That's how we engage kids in their learning. All of those things are part of the state strategic plan, and it's really a great plan. It was going very well in Ohio until the pandemic hit. And then they had to make significant adjustments because we knew we had problems. And kids dealt with more problems. They wound up with mental health problems. Our early learners, many of their preschools were getting interrupted often by the COVID, and they weren't able to be in classrooms. So for these children to be able to acclimate themselves back into school and to get the assistance that they needed, every month the state school board would come together to look at the data, look at the budget to see how we could meet those goals, what pieces we needed to put into place. And for the first 6 months of my term of office, that's exactly what happened. We would look every single month, would say, okay, we have children that need to have one-to-one tutoring. Somebody needs to come in there and help it. So they found many different ways that would take place. We finally started adding more social workers and mental health providers so they could help some of our tween kids that lost almost a year and a half of their learning, that they would learn to work in groups and with their fellow classmates, because they're very much about peers at that age. So mental health services were very, very important. And then the other problem we had was getting kids back in schools because the attendance rates still are not back what they should be. So for the first 6 months, it's exactly what we did. The interim superintendent, Dr. Siddons, was really wonderful at that. And we had everybody coming in from the department telling us what they were doing, how they were doing it, and then asking for input from us. And we would give them input that we received from school districts, from parents, from stakeholders, and to inform the instructions as we went forward. But let me take you back just to the day that I was sworn in January of 23. It was about 15 minutes after I was sworn in that Senator Brenner, who is the head of the Senate Education Committee, came in and sat down at the table. And he made it very clear that their number one piece of business that they were going to do in this General Assembly was to introduce Senate Bill 1, which was the takeover of the Board of Education and the Department of Education. And we kept asking, why? Why are you doing this? And trying to say, what is the point of this? And he said, well, you haven't gotten anything done. Well, that's because they throw in a lot of culture wars on top of the state board. That's what the state board had to deal with. But you haven't gotten anything done. And then after we pushed him a little bit further, his bottom line was, we want to be like Florida, which was awful because everything we've read coming out of Florida could not be any worse for the children in Ohio. And so that's exactly what the Senate did. As soon as they got into session, they introduced Senate Bill 1. There was proponent testimony and opponent testimony. And they passed it out of committee really fast, got it onto the Senate floor, and it was passed right through the Senate. I mean, really, really fast. They sent it over to the House of Representatives and was sent to the Education Committee. Senate Bill 1 never made it out of the House Education Committee. It never received a vote on the floor of the House. And law does require, Whenever you have something like that, it must be heard 3 times before it can be enacted as a bill. It never got done. So then we went into our budget process, which the State Department, the Department of Education looked at all the needs for our budget and presented those budgetary items to the governor. The governor presented his budget to the General Assembly. And then the House of Representatives started working on the budget. And they kept working on the budget and working on the budget. In DeWine's budget, there was no Senate Bill 1. None. When the House finalized the budget and sent it over to the Senate, there was no Senate Bill 1 in the budget. Only at 11:58 on June 30th of 2023, Senate Bill 1 was inserted into the budget bill and passed, and 4 days later was signed by the governor. So pretty shocking that, number one, we have a constitutional amendment that says the department and the board must be nonpartisan. Number two, they threw an education bill into the budget. That's a single subject. That's not something that you get to do. And the third thing is, it never came out of the House and got the hearings it needed to have. It never was agreed upon by both the Senate and the House to move forward. So it was really shocking to state board members when we came to our meeting 1st of July and tried through what had happened. And it was pretty disastrous. There was about 1,000 pages of Senate Bill 1, and it started laying out all the problems. Can you still hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Yes, you can still hear me. Okay.
Yes.
So then we had people come into the board and they started telling us everything that was going to be taken away, and they were going to do this transition in 60 days. Well, the transition started faster than that, because the very first thing that happened was that all of the budget and all the data came out of the Department of Special Students. This is the department that meets the needs of all of our children living in poverty, our kids who have special needs, our English language learners, our gifted children. And this is all federal money. It's a big pocket of money that they immediately took that money out from underneath the Board of Education and put it behind the new wall at the Department of Education and Workforce Development. That was a huge red flag when we saw that happen. So there were 7 board members who ran on a progressive or a pro-education platform, and we filed a lawsuit with the help of Democracy Forward. And we took it to court. We sued DeWine, and we got immediately removed from that lawsuit because we are elected officials, and so the Attorney General is responsible for representing us. So we were immediately kicked off that lawsuit. But there were additional parents and school board members from other school districts that also stayed on that. Well, we didn't get very far with that lawsuit. They said we had no standing whatsoever to challenge the governor. No standing whatsoever to challenge the governor on anything. Does that? I mean, we're citizens in the state of Ohio. How do you tell somebody you don't have a standing to challenge what has been done? But they did it anyway. And now that lawsuit is in the appeals court. So not knowing where we're going on that, but I will tell you that there is a large coalition of people across the state that now say, okay, fine, we need to take our Board of Education back and our state board back. And so we're looking at a citizen-led voter referendum again to get our Department of Education back. So why this is really important is that I know a lot of you heard from Fanon Rucker and talking about Project 2025. Well, let's talk about Project 2025 and all the little pieces of it. The very first thing on Project 2025 was the destruction of the Department of Education at the federal level. Well, guess what? Ohio has already done that. Their second tenant. Now, vouchers for everybody, private school vouchers for everybody. Well, guess what? $1 billion this year has been spent in Ohio in private school vouchers. No accountability for charter schools or non-publics or private schools. No accountability. Well, Ohio has no accountability for any of the non-public schools. It is also suggesting that there are no protections for our children in LGBTQ situations. Ohio is moving this way already. We've had several bills that have been passed that are very discriminatory toward our LGBTQ students. We also have a bill in the House right now called House Bill 556. This is a bill that teachers and librarians could be charged with a felony and imprisoned for lending books to students that may have obscene materials in them. There's no definition of what they mean by obscene, but that is part of Project 2025. Having no Department of Education at the national level, that means that the money going to Title I to support our students with disabilities, et cetera, and poverty, that money would go behind a wall. You wouldn't see it. And they're talking about it would go directly to parents to fund private school education rather than go to the students that need assistance. That's already happening in Ohio. They want a very conservative curriculum. They want to be able to rewrite it. Guess what? Behind the wall of Department of Education and Workforce Development, they're already starting to implement the American Birthright curriculum, which comes out of the Heritage Foundation. They're already doing this. So some of the other things that 2025 will do in schools will scale back civil rights protections. That means that you can discriminate then by race and sex. It also wants to reduce eligibility for free and reduced lunch for our children. And it has a parent's bill of rights, that a parent can walk into your classroom at any time and demand that you teach X, Y, and Z, or tell you what you're going to do rather than the school district. These are some very serious concerns, but I'm already telling you these things are in place in Ohio. And what's really bad about this is that really we're finding every day there's something more. I hope you saw recently that Matt Hofmann, who's the Senate president, was bragging about the fact that now the Senate is providing taxpayer dollars to refurbish, renovate, or build new parochial and private schools, mainly Catholic, using your tax dollars. The other thing they're going to do is they're going to try and make every school district have a policy which allows students to leave during the student day for religious instruction. They're not willing to pay for student lunches for all children, but if these children goes to these religious classes, they'll pay for the lunches there, but they won't pay for lunches for the kids if they stay in the building. They're leaning toward what J.D. Vance is talking about, a theocracy, a white theocracy. Christian nationalism, and it's very concerning. But right now, this is what we're dealing with in Ohio. So take you down to Hamilton County and what these Ed Choice vouchers are doing. We know that Cincinnati Public Schools should have received $30 million more this year in state funding. However, if you would look at what's going on in Hamilton County, the number one school district in the state for the number of dollars going to a school, being taken away from a school district for parochial and private schools is Oak Hills, the number one taking Ed Choice vouchers in the state in the amount of money. But here's the really bad one. The number one school that has the highest increase of students participating in the Ed Choice voucher program is Indian Hill. Not the largest dollars, but the largest amount of increase in participants, because these are all your rich and wealthy people with jets that can fly here and there, but yet they are still getting a portion of those Ed Choice voucher dollars so they can go off on some fun vacation or buy their kid a fancy car. This is what's happening. We have over $1 billion that has gone to these vouchers, and it's taking away from fully funding our schools in the formula funding. But we still, even with the full formula funding, would not be back in the funding formula before Kasich started cutting everything from municipalities and school districts. So we have a serious issue here in Ohio. We have a lot of people, and we spoke about it earlier. We have a supermajority, and Matt Hofmann says time and time again, we have a supermajority, we can do whatever we want. And that is exactly what's happening. On November 4th, the day before our election, the voucher bill goes to trial. This is the Ed Choice voucher that has been determined unconstitutional time and time again, but it's now going to court on November 4th. So that's Bill Phyllis's group, and they've been working on that. And we've got quite a few school districts across the state of Ohio that are part of that lawsuit. It's what we can do to move forward. We got to pass issue 1, citizens, not politicians, because we need to have people in the General Assembly that represent all of us, not the extremists that are coming in from some of your rural districts. The second thing we need to do, we need to elect our 3 Supreme Court judges, because if this Ed Choice voucher gets all the way up to the Supreme Court, we need to have people that are going to say, no, our public tax dollars should not be going to private schools or parochial schools or Catholic schools, because we have a separation of church and state. And everybody just needs to vote. Vote and get out there so that you have people. Our Senate races are really important, because if we are successful in November and Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are elected, we have to have a Senate, because our national Supreme Court is seriously conservative and not moving in the right direction for us. We need to be able to have Senate confirming new Supreme Court justices that will even out the court, so it's a balanced court rather than a highly conservative court. So we've got some serious work to do. I could say more, but I want to know if you have any questions or next steps.
I'll make a quick comment and then ask a question, Katie. I happen to have worked in the field in IT, and I can attest to the fact what you mentioned in terms of accountability. The private schools don't have any accountability realistically. I used to support school systems on what was called their EMIS reporting, which was basically accountability tool. And the private schools had one report. It was very simple, as I recall. It was usually something about characteristics of the child, and that was about it. and there might have been 30 questions, something like that on it. The public schools, I think there was around 16. I'm kind of vague on it. It's been a number of years now. I stopped supporting that back in 2016, I think it was. But they had all kinds of reports that they had to do, and reporting out their accountability. Everything from grades to activities and things of that nature. It was just that alone that public schools probably had to spend quite a bit of money on, I'm sure, in order to get all of that done. But my question comes back to this, then. Has there been a challenge? I'm sure there must have been a challenge to what's going on now based on the 1953 amendment you were talking about. And what's happened with that in the courts?
Well, that's the lawsuit that I was part of that the AG kicked me off of. That one was disallowed in Franklin County Common Pleas Court, saying that they had no standing in which to challenge the governor.
Okay.
And then that has now been filed in first appeals in the appeals court in Franklin County. So we are waiting for the next trial date to see where that goes.
Right.
But see, where the lawsuit is on the three issues that I spoke of. Number one, that they threw an education bill into a budget bill, and they're supposed to be separate and apart from. You have to have single subject. Number two, this was a constitutional amendment that the folks came up with. You just can't get rid of a constitutional amendment by throwing it in a budget bill. In addition, it never had the hearings that it was supposed to have in order for the Senate and the House to agree upon this and to receive all the feedback from our community partners. So those were the three tenets of why we're moving forward with that lawsuit. And it's being funded by Democracy Forward, which is a national group that sees this happening all across the country.
Well, I could say this real quick. Unless Donnelly, Stewart, and Forbes get elected to the Ohio Supreme Court, I suspect there's nothing going to happen that's good regarding that bill. The current Supreme Court would come up with some reason to deny it.
That's right. Because if we can have bones in boneless chicken, we can have almost anything.
That's right. Okay, Sue Ellen, or whoever has their hand raised.
Yeah. So what can citizens do to support your suit?
Well,
if anything.
Right now, I would say become a part of Honesty for Ohio Education, which is a coalition of about 75 partners that came into being after the attacks on public education. And every Wednesday we meet from 8:30 to 9:30. It talks about every single bill that's out there, what citizens can do, how we can fight back, how you can talk to your legislatures, and to make sure to know that there are good people in our state legislature, but they've got to be brave enough to step forward. Like Lou Blessing is a really nice guy. I can sit down and have a wonderful conversation with Lou Blessing, and he's in the Senate. But when it comes time for a vote, he has to align with Hofmann's caucus, or else he'll be sanctioned. That's the power that they have. So we have got to elect people who, as Eve Bolton said, are not afraid of stepping out and taking the consequences. And we have too many folks in our Senate that are not willing to do that. We're getting more and more people in the House that are willing to fight, and we need to do better.
I have a separate question while I'm on here. That's okay. Would you re-clarify what you said about the relationship of Oak Hills to the vouchers?
Okay, the Archbishop in Cincinnati strongly encouraged all the pastors to tell their people in their parochials and private schools that they needed to apply for the Ed Choice vouchers, or else they would not receive any scholarship assistance from the churches. So the Catholic Church in Hamilton County has basically bargained with the devil to take Ed Choice voucher money out of the mouths of children in the urban districts and the public school districts and put it into the parochial and private schools.
Sorry, I know you're trying to get to Oak Hills. Where would I find documentation of that? Is that like in the Catholic Telegraph? How was that communicated to parochial school parents?
I actually have some, David Pepper has done a lot of work on this.
Okay.
And he has actually had some presentations where he's talking. This is what this archbishop said. This is what this pastor at the church said. This is, and very clearly what it is. But then here's the bottom line of this. Say, for instance, their tuition before was $5,000. Well, they're getting $6,000 from the Ed Choice vouchers. So now they're increasing the amount of tuition at each one of these schools. So, yeah. So they might get, like the high school kids might get $8,400 for each kid. But is that going to be enough? And we know that $8,400 is not going to pick up the difference for a poor kid to be able to go to St. X as what a rich kid going to St. X is going to get. There's no way that they can possibly compete with the same amount of dollars.
So, but Oak Hills is not a parochial school.
No, Oak
Somebody
Hills
needs to be a
School District lost the amount of money to Ed Choice vouchers. That particular school district on our west side of town, and we know our west side of town.
Thank you.
someone's talking in the background somewhere.
Must be at your house, Dan.
Okay, 1 second. I think I know, 1 second. I think I know what's going on.
None of us can hear it.
Okay, good. Great. Go ahead then. I'm sorry, Shot.
Yeah. There also, there's talk that some parochial schools are building new schools because they're getting this money.
That is
I'm a 1968 graduate of St. X, and for years and years and years, about 50% of the boys there got some form of financial assistance.
Mhm.
The tuition's now $17,300. I just heard, I think the New York Times had a story on this, that of the 1,300 odd students there, 1,100 are on vouchers.
Yep.
Now, for years and years, it was 50% were getting, we're getting some assistance. They either had to work at school, do something, blah, blah, or got a scholarship of sorts. So it's just gone crazy. And then the worst part about it is, like 2 years ago, I think it was Henry Fath just gave St. X $50 million.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this was maybe I can't remember exactly if it was supposed to help with tuition for, kids who couldn't afford it. And then I get stuff from X all the time because they're really good at soaking people for money. The alumni is very strong and donates a lot of money. So I got this thing and one of the pages is from the vice president in charge of a vice president for advancement. And he's saying, here's the other thing you can do. Now there's a tax credit. You can donate an individual or a couple. For an individual, it's a $750 tax credit.
Mm-hmm.
And for a couple, it's $1,500. So he's like, have at it, folks. And, the people, my friends are just going, I'm not giving X another buck, just because Henry Fath gave them 50 million. They don't need anything I got. And it's just a crime when, they're taking that money. I'm just sorry. That's just not right.
Well, the increase you have in the Ed Choice vouchers last year, this year, is because they increased the threshold from 250% of poverty to 450% of poverty. And anybody who is over that 450%, they still get a portion of the voucher money. They still get a portion, no matter how rich they are, they get a portion of the money. So that's why the numbers of participants there is going up. But it's still $8,400 is not going to provide an education for kids that can't afford it if it's costing $17,000.
Right. So Katie, you were involved a lot. I taught at Cincinnati Public from 75 to 79.
Mm-hmm.
And I always said that they started voucher programs to try and weaken the teachers union because they thought the teachers union was really strong. So they started this voucher to try to cut down the number of teachers, through the years. And then it's just gotten blown out of proportion. And I do follow David Pepper's thing, and he's got just some incredible information about how with the Phyllis thing that's been going on since 1997, where they're not funding it properly. And then a few years ago, they said, "Oh, we really should do this." But they said it will cost $750 million to do this. So what David said, they said, we'll phase this in over time. But they spent almost $1 billion last year on vouchers because they just exploded. Anybody can get them anymore, but they had to phase in the rest of it. And it's still, like you said, somebody just ran the numbers, and Cincinnati Public is shorted $30 million of what they should get. And he had a whole list of every school district in the state and how much they were shorted.
Right.
It's sad.
It really is sad. And we're just scratching the surface. If 2025 goes into place, it's really going to get bad.
I put David Pepper's address for his Perspectives, it's called, in the chat. But if you didn't see that, you can go to substack.com and then do a search for David Pepper, and you'll see Perspectives is one of your options to choose. And that's where most of his writings are. And you can do you can subscribe to him there. Other questions?
So I would probably say, voting and what we do this November, it's very important. But then on the horizon, just like we've had to fight for every single thing else here in Ohio, we're going to have to fight to get our Board of Education and our Department of Education back to nonpartisan, so it is not being run by the governor's office, because that could be positive and negative, and depending on who you have in the office. So it needs to be nonpartisan because we need to be meeting the needs of all of Ohioans, not just a select few.
Hey, Katie.
Yes.
Brewster here. Good to see you.
I saw you there.
Thanks for all you do. So are there any competitive races this year? You're not up this year, right?
No, I'm not.
So they're 4-year terms, correct? And
right.
They're staggered for those who are actually elected. I know the others are appointed.
Yeah, there are 6 districts right now that are up for election. The one closest to us is the one that's east of Cincinnati, which actually is in 16 counties. It's District 5. That previously was held, or it is held right now, by Brendan Shea, who's a real anti-LGBTQ. He's a real extremist. And so he's leaving the board, thank goodness. But the 2 people that are running for this seat, one is Mary Vinegar, who is a retired teacher, who would be someone I would support. But the person that's running against her is a Moms for Liberty candidate. And she's an extremist. So we have in Franklin County, up in Cuyahoga County, in District 7 and District 1, we have very strong pro-education candidates. So we feel that coming out of this, 5 out of the 6 should be pro-education candidates. And so therefore, Matt Hofmann is just going to lose his mind again, because he's going to realize that we're going to push back against his agenda even more. Because
news.
right now, the only thing the State Board of Education is doing is teacher licensure and professional conduct. And we had to fight. What I didn't say in my comments is that during 2018 and again in 2019, our state legislature were short money. So you took $5 million from the teacher licensure fee in 18 and another $5 million from the teacher licensure fees in 19. DeWine wanted it restored in the budget. The House wanted it restored in the budget. But guess what? The Senate did not restore it to the budget. And so we've had to really cut back on staffing from 70 staff members to 58. Our new superintendent has no administrative assistants. He sends out all emails himself. Everything that we have done is very cost saving. School board members, we used to be able to spend the night before our meetings or in the middle of 2-day meetings. We're now down to 1-day meeting. We have no overnight stays, no out of state, any kind of conferences, and any conferences here in the state, we have to pay for ourselves. So we've cut back on just about everything you can cut back on. And luckily, one House Rep, I think was named Edwards, forced the controlling board to give us $4.6 million at least to be able to cover until June, that we would be able to have enough money to be able to do our work without having to increase teacher licensure fees.
Well, thanks for the fight. Good job.
You can't quit, you know.
Yeah.
One of the folks that got elected was Senator Fetter, who was
Yes.
being delegate on the Senate Education Committee, and Brenner hates her, and it's a mutual hating society, and he is just so tormented that she is on the board, and she was the one that actually got him pinned into a corner so he came out. But we just want to be like Florida. She actually got him to spill the beans. So, you know, we love having her because she sees beyond this. And she actually gave us a little tidbit. She said, you know, every single General Assembly since 1992, when Voinovich and Bush decided to start this voucher thing and take over the school board, every single General Assembly has had a Senate Bill 1, maybe with no words in it, but it's been there. So when they got to the point where they had the supermajority, they knew they would be able to run it through. So that's when they finally did it. It's been coming for a long time.
Yeah. Kate, given that what you described as the 5 pro-education candidates would win, how would that change the balance, would you say, of the state board right now? Or
well, right now, the pro-education, we are 6 out of the 11 elected boards. This would bring us up to 7 or 8 out of the electeds. So that would be able to give us a pushback on the appointees. Because if the now this is another game they play. DeWine chooses who these people are going to be, who the appointees are. He sends those names to the Senate. The Senate then sends them to the Education Committee. The Education Committee sits on the appointees' approval. They sit on them so that they can say to them at any time, if you do not vote the way we tell you to vote, we will remove you from the board because you haven't been approved yet. So, in fact, 2 years ago, was in 21, there was an anti-racism resolution that the board had passed. And then DeWine and the Senate decided they wanted that rescinded. And there were 3 appointees that voted to not rescind it. And they all lost their positions, including the president of the board at that time. But they were willing to stand up and say no, but the rest of them totally caved in.
So the appointees serve on the board actively without being appointed?
No, well, they are appointed by the governor, but they have not been approved by the Senate. So they always have their thumb on top of them to control what they do and say.
Well, if they're not approved, they shouldn't be able to participate in the
Well,
committee.
except the Ohio Revised Code has different wording in there that says once they've been submitted to the Senate, then they can serve.
Another loophole.
Another loophole. As many things we think of, they already got a loophole. So you're shaking your head, Dan, there. I mean, I do that every day.
I can imagine. Yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm glad I'm not any closer to it.
Well, and I have, I was trying to get somebody to run in District 5 because I'm running over to District 5 because the guy there didn't do anything. And I was trying to get Elliot Grossman to run because he's done a lot of work out here with Loveland Schools and their school board, and he was going to run out here. And he says, nope, Katie, not doing it because I'm not interested in teacher licensure or professional conduct. I want to do the good work. And I said, well, we're not doing the good work right now. We just have to continue to fight. And people are asking me whether I'm going to run again in 26. I am, because I have to keep fighting and showing that we need to continue to fight back. And we might get our Board of Education back if we keep fighting. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
Bob, or let's let Bob go first shot.
Okay.
Go ahead, Bob. You're muted, by the way, Bob. Put your cursor on your screen.
Usually if I press on the space bar, it unmutes, but apparently it's not, that
Didn't work.
doesn't work today.
No.
What things are going to be on the November 4th ballot that you want us to vote for? There's some Supreme Court justices.
Absolutely.
Okay. Can we put those names in chat?
Forbes, Donnelly, and Stewart.
Dan, are you putting that
Forbes,
in chat?
Donnelly, and Stewart.
Put that in chat. And any other things that we should be voting for?
Issue 1, to get rid of the gerrymandering so we have fair representation in the
Okay. I know all about that one.
House.
Thanks to Dan.
That Senate, we need to vote for Sherrod Brown because we don't need a crackpot like Bernie Moreno to be able to be in the Senate, because we need to have at least 50 Senate to be able to appoint Supreme Court justices. So that's why the Senate is so important. And of course, Kamala and Tim, we need to get rid of this 2025 for sure.
Right.
And Greg Landsman.
Absolutely, Greg Landsman. Poor guy, he's really taken a lot of heat. He's taken a lot of heat. He's trying to do everything he can. He's been to Israel so many times. He's been trying to work on a ceasefire, and yet he's getting a lot of backlash from a lot of people. And it's really sad. He's really fighting for us, and people have not been kind to him because he's Jewish and trying to work through this. But really does need our help.
Okay, Chuck, you want to go ahead?
Something to look forward to. Arizona's got this same voucher program, and it just blew over $1 billion, and they didn't have it in the budget, but they're going to pay it. So what do? They're cutting other things in the budget. Maybe highway repairs or something. They're just letting the education budget just go wild, and so they're having to cut other things. So we'll see where how that goes over.
Yeah, well, more and more states are putting this on, are being voted down. I think it just happened in North Carolina. More and more states are voting it down, saying, no, we're not going to do it. So they're looking at what's happening to Arizona. They're bankrupting their state is what they've done. They're so much in favor of these vouchers that they're bankrupting their state. And you can't survive that way. So But now what's the next step is they want to do these individual savings accounts. And so X amount of dollars will be given to each parent for each kid. And then mom and dad are going to have to run around and try and figure out where they can send their kids and who's going to accept their dollars and whatever. Can you imagine that? Parents that are working 2 and 3 jobs or trying to put food on the table for their kids, they're not going to have time to be shopping around for wherever they can find. And of course, most of the resources are going to go to those places where you have affluent people, with people that already have the ability to pay for their kids' education. And it's not going to help anybody. It's going to be a system of haves and have-nots.
Very good. Okay, any other questions tonight? Comments? Concerns?
Yeah.
No, let's drop the concerns.
Thank you.
We'll be
Thank
here all
you,
night.
Katie.
Yeah.
I really appreciate Katie's very direct and nailing this down for us, so we can have talking points to just say to people, this is how important your vote is.
That's right.
Get it done. I mean, the only way we fix this is with our votes.
That's right. And school board elections are coming up next year. Who you elect on these school boards, incredibly important, because they are our last line of defense right now. They're the ones that are going to stand firm, because we're a local control state. They're the ones that are going to stand firm and said, oh no, you're not going to do that to our children in our schools. So be very careful who's going to be running for school board next year. I will tell you this though, our last school board elections in 23, 70% of the Moms for Liberty candidates were defeated because people do not want the extremism in their schools. We just need to call them out for who they are and make sure everybody knows about it. There's a book I recently read called Hit 'em Where It Hurts. So that's what you got to do. You got to hit them with what they stand for and who they are. So.
Very good.
Thank you,
Very
Katie.
good. Thank you very much, Katie.
Well, you're welcome.